going in.
Okay, two's in. Three's on final.
Bullseye 2, go ahead in.
I'm coming in. I'm on final at this time.
That was some of the actually radio communications of 14 men, 6 Green Berets and 8 Montagnard brothers dropped onto a lonely hilltop deep in the Aishau Valley. They're outnumbered 107-1 by an entire NVA regiment that's about to launch the war's biggest offensive. What happens next is a 30-minute Alamo so savage it sounds like a Hollywood action movie, except it actually happened on August 7th, 1971. And outside a tiny circle of Special Forces veterans, almost nobody has ever heard of it. Khe Sanh, once a bustling Marine base located in the northwestern part of South Vietnam, had become a ghost town for more than 3 years when the summer of 1971 came around. The South Vietnamese army had briefly used it in February for their invasion of Laos. However, after that bloody debacle, the South Vietnamese abandoned Khe Sanh along with control of the entire region, turning over immense areas to NVA control. Practically overnight, the NVA began extending the Ho Chi Minh Trail highways into South Vietnam. U.S. intelligence began tracking a large enemy force shifting across the DMZ just east of Khe Sanh in late July 1971, threatening the coastal cities of Hue, Da Nang, and Phu Bai, where some of the last sizable American ground forces were based. It was essential to learn what was happening near Khe Sanh. The Studies and Observations Group answered the call. SOGI's specialty was covert missions behind enemy lines in Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam, and by 1971, SOGI had shifted most of its operations in-country to cover the continuing U.S. withdrawal. Recon Team Kansas would be assigned the Khe Sanh mission, which had become a prisoner snatch, nothing new for RT Kansas, an 11-man team consisting of 3 Green Berets and 8 Montagnard commandos. How do you grab a prisoner with a recon team going into enemy territory? Simple. You grab an easygoing, lanky first lieutenant from Fargo, North Dakota, Lauren Hagen, as your team leader and add 2 more Green Beret sergeants, Tony Anderson and Bruce Berg. Brainstorming through several possible scenarios, they finally settled on the best option: land conspicuously on an abandoned firebase, which would draw some sort of reaction from the NVA. The NVA shows up to see what's going on, get into a short fight, extract by helicopter. Half of Hagen's men would stay hidden on the hilltop, waiting for the NVA to send a squad to see if the Americans had left sensors or bombing beacons behind, as SOG teams often did. The hidden men would then spring their trap, ambush the NVA, grab a prisoner, and exfil themselves. Lieutenant Hagen added 3 additional Green Beret volunteers in case of a serious firefight: Staff Sergeant Orrin Bingham, Sergeant Bill Queen, and Sergeant William Ramundi, bringing RT Kansas to 14 strong, 6 Green Berets, and 8 Montagnard commandos. Inserted at last light on August 6, 1971, Lieutenant Hagen surveyed the brush and bomb craters below them, and split the team into 3 elements to establish defensive coverage of every slope of the hilltop. The team immediately went to work restoring the abandoned firebase's 2 dilapidated bunkers and the shallow trenches. Hagen knew the enemy had to have seen the helicopters approach and dropped them at the LZ as the lieutenant and his men prepared their defense. Shortly after midnight, the SOG men noticed that 2 campfires were now visible on the 2 facing ridgelines, a very unusual thing for the NVA, as they normally concealed themselves very well, especially at night. Shortly after that, enemy probers were at the base of the hill, provocatively firing from all directions. At 0100 hours, a United States Air Force AC-130 Spectre gunship was circling overhead, walking 40mm and 20mm rounds around the hill nearly all night. Not once did RT Kansas fire a weapon. They remained silent, waiting to spring their trap. Then, around 0300 hours, the SOG team heard the first of the NVA trucks arrive, tailgates dropping, and the sounds of soldiers dismounting and assembling. This was odd, very odd. In the darkness at the base of the hill, dismounting NVA soldiers formed into platoons and companies. Their leaders marched to their assigned attack positions, waiting for dawn. Shortly before sunrise, a silence covered the surrounding region, forebodingly quiet. Lieutenant Hagen then noticed a familiar noise, the same as earlier, the sound of more trucks arriving, more soldiers dismounting and positioning themselves. RT Kansas's trap may have worked too well. At a coastal airbase 50 or so miles away, a United States Air Force Forward Air Controller, SAC, and a flight of helicopters were just lifting off and making their way for the first part of the plan, the false extraction, ETA 30 minutes. As the darkness gave way to light, bobbing through the fog that blanketed the Aishau Valley that morning, Lieutenant Hagen noticed glimpses of NVA on one slope. Then on another slope, pith helmets appeared. Then one of the three defensive elements reported NVA on the third and fourth slopes too. It was clear now, their plan had worked too well. The hill was completely encircled by NVA, something that would have required an entire regiment at minimum, at least 1,000 men. Intelligence agencies later would report the NVA were laying a Soviet-made tactical fuel pipeline very near to RT Kansas's Hilltop, the first ever extended into South Vietnam. It would be of strategic value a few months later during the Easter 1972 offensive. The NVA regimental commander understood that they needed to dispatch the Americans quickly. RT Kansas had unknowingly just landed within sight of the Hanoi High Command's most critical new venture, a 6-inch fuel pipeline being laid across the DMZ, absolutely essential for solving their logistical problems and allowing entire tank battalions to move through for the war's largest offensive. The NVA's 304th Division was already massing here, plus a regiment from the 308th Division as well, preparing for the upcoming 1972 Easter offensive. Concealed by the ground fog, a 4th and later a 5th Battalion arrived and moved into positions. Later, SOG's commander, Colonel John Sadler, would learn an entire regiment had stormed that hill, supported by a 2nd regiment, the assault approximately 2,000 enemy infantry. As the morning fog dispersed, the terrible truth was revealing itself. There was no time for an inspiring speech or words of comfort, just serious soldier work. In the final moments, Lieutenant Hagen repositioned weapons as his men readied grenades and stacked magazines. The Catholic Montagnard commandos made the sign of the cross, one last prayer for strength as they prepared to fight this hell. Then they came. A well-aimed RPG smashed into Bruce Berg's bunker, collapsing it. This signaled the attack. The world around the hilltop went from nothing to tens of thousands of rounds a second as all hell broke loose. Enemy fire from all around them. Sergeant Anderson could see dozens of NVA rushing in lines up his slope, feeding belt after belt into the M60, cutting them down as they charged up the hill. Hagen shouted that he was going to check Berg and ran directly into a ferocious maelstrom, bullets ricocheting and slamming into the earth in front of, behind, and beneath his feet as he dashed toward the collapsed bunker. A dozen yards in, fire from the opposing slope cut him down, killing him. Staff Sergeant Bingham left the bunker to reposition a claymore and was killed instantly when a bullet struck him in the head. One of the yards in a trench by Anderson fired several bursts, then jumped up to pull back and fell into Anderson's lap, dead. It had been less than 5 minutes since the attack had started, and RT Kansas had lost its leader, Green Berets Berg, and Bingham, and one of the Montagnard commandos. 4 killed in less than 4 minutes. Small arms fire rattled closer on all sides. Grenades lobbed up from below the hill crest where wave after wave of NVA scurried behind small rises and rolled from bomb crater to bomb crater. Anderson, now RT Kansas's team leader, dashed out from the trench looking for Hagen's body. Unfortunately, all he could see was 100 or more khaki-clad NVA almost at the top, feeding belt after belt into the M60 as he moved to the other slopes, running belt after belt of ammo through the machine gun until a grenade thrown by the NVA landed too close to the M60, rendering it useless. As more and more NVA moved up the hill, grenades flying in from just beyond the curvature of the hill, RT Kansas exchanged grenade throws with the NVA until the recon team had exhausted their supply of grenades. Out of grenades, the M60 destroyed, the recon team was reduced to their small arms, and they were running through ammo as the NVA continued to push up the hill. Anderson, now wounded from shrapnel and an AK round lodged in his elbow, grabbed the last 2 living yards, circling below the nearest NVA as their perimeter was being pinched smaller and smaller. Somehow Anderson and the 2 Montagnards had managed to reach the survivors on the opposite side. Anderson found Bingham. As he started to lift him, he learned then that Bingham too was killed from a shot to the head. As bullets zipped past his head, he dragged Bingham back to where Bill Queen and William Raimondi were dug in. Anderson repositioned the still living members of RT Kansas into a much tighter, practically back-to-back defensive circle just off the hilltop. This is where they would make their last stand. The team's primary radio had been destroyed by AK fire. The backup emergency radio that Anderson carried had been shot out of his hand. Ramundi tossed him another little survival radio. It was the last one the recon team had. The NVA had now begun to roll over the crest of the hill like a tidal wave, their AKs blending together into one never-ending burst. No place left to fall back to. RT Kansas's men were firing almost point blank. For Recon Team Kansas, the time it took to reload their weapons could mean life or death. It looked like an ant mound from the air above, moving figures everywhere. Nearly overrun by the overwhelming NVA forces, and looking like this might be the end for the remaining members of RT Kansas. A familiar sound was growing louder and louder. The Cobra attack helicopters. They had been escorting the Hueys but throttled to full speed, leaving the slower Hueys behind when they got the emergency radio call. Their 20mm cannons and rockets rained down all around RT Kansas. Shortly after the Cobras arrived, F-4 Phantoms were throwing napalm into the fight, strafing the NVA forces with their Vulcan cannons. The NVA instead fled for cover just as the Hueys came descending in. Anderson and Ramundi, both now also wounded, began to drag as many of their fallen teammates as they could fit into the first Huey. They then helped Queen, whose wounds were more severe than the ones Anderson and Ramundi had gotten, and the remaining Montagnard commandos into the second Huey.
Count 5 out here, and I got some badly wounded.
Okay, put her up, balls to the wall, babe. Get them home.
Right there, I'm going fast, okay? Well, we leave. Blow the structure, we got a lot of orders. And a lot of orders here. Over.
And gunships, some other gunships, come in there. We need some help.
Sergeant Palfrey did that right here, but I don't have yours marked yet.
Okay, if you just have where the chopper's set down, shoot all around him.
I have the one that's down.
Okay, there's yellow smoke on top of the hill. There's
Fuck,
yellow
I'm
smoke
extended.
on the hill. Chopper is about 200 meters southeast of us.
Where is it in relation to this car?
Northwest. You gotta see all the smoke up here, babe.
Small 3's extended.
Okay, I'm coming up, breaking right now. Coming in.
Okay, Cubby, 7-2's coming in. I still got some third. Okay. 7-2, they're working on old fire-based scotch.
Cubby. This is Cubby. Is there anyone else on the ground? Bullseye 2, this is Cubby. How many you got?
This is some of the actually audio from that morning. The voice that is a little hard to hear was Sergeant Anderson using the emergency radio. You'll be able to hear the Covey landing the Hayas and guiding the Cobras and fast movers on where to fire their weapons. Lieutenant Hagen, Staff Sergeant Bingham, Sergeant Berg, and 6 Montagnards had been killed. Sergeants Queen and Ramundi both suffered multiple shrapnel wounds from frag grenades. Anderson had been struck by both small arms fire and shrapnel, and the 2 surviving Montagnards had also been wounded. Years later in an interview, Tony Anderson would say, "It's amazing that any of us came through it with the amount of incoming that we were getting." Attributing their survival to their fallen team leader, he explained, "He epitomized what a special forces officer should be, attentive to detail, a lot of rehearsals, followed through on things, we were ready." I think that was probably the only thing that kept us from being totally overrun. Everybody was alert and knew what was happening and was waiting. Anderson would later accompany the bodies of the fallen Montagnard fighters, returning them to their home village. As soon as the villagers saw them driving up in the trucks, they all knew. The villagers were crying, grieving for their fallen sons, husbands, and friends. Anderson spoke through an interpreter, telling the grieving families that he was proud to fight alongside them. They were good fighters that had died for a good cause, referring to them as family. A SOG Bright Light team returned to that firebase the following day, recovering Lauren Hagen's body. Counting 185 NVA lay dead on that hill and an estimated 2 to 3 times that number wounded. A few months later, the intelligence generated by RT Kansas Hilltop Defense helped U.S. analysts read enemy intentions, enabling American air power to counter the NVA's Easter offensive. At the Alamo, 188 Americans stood against 3,000 Mexican soldiers, a ratio of 16-1. Custer's last stand, 211 cavalry succumbed to 3,500 Sioux warriors, a ratio of 16.5-1. The most heralded action in British military history, the 1879 Battle of Rorke's Drift, which resulted in 11 Victoria Crosses, Britain's highest medal comparable to the U.S. Medal of Honor. 140 British troops withstood assaults by 4,000 Zulus, a ratio of 28 to 1. On August 7, 1971, 14 men of RT Kansas, led by First Lieutenant Loren Hagen, outnumbered 107 to 1, 4 times as disadvantageous as Rorke's Drift, 7 times worse than the Alamo. Remaining classified for decades after the war, Anderson received the Distinguished Service Cross. Queen, Raimondi, Berg, and Bingham were all awarded Silver Stars. Enough was disclosed that First Lieutenant Loren Hagen's family was presented the U.S. Army's final Vietnam War Medal of Honor. The citation read, "Farce, First Lieutenant Hagen distinguished himself in action while serving as the team leader of a small reconnaissance team operating deep within enemy-held territory. At approximately 0600 hours on the morning of the 7th of August 1971, the small team came under a fierce assault by a superior-sized enemy force using heavy small arms, automatic weapons, mortar, and rocket fire. First Lieutenant Hagen immediately began returning small arms fire upon the attackers and successfully led his team in repelling the first enemy onslaught. He then quickly deployed his men into more strategic defense locations before the enemy struck again in an attempt to overrun and annihilate the beleaguered team's members. First Lieutenant Hagen repeatedly exposed himself to the enemy fire directed at him as he constantly moved about the team's perimeter, directing fire, rallying the members, and resupplying the team with ammunition, while courageously returning small arms and hand grenade fire in a valorous attempt to repel the advancing enemy force. The courageous actions and expert leadership abilities of First Lieutenant Hagen were a great source of inspiration and instilled confidence in the team members. After observing an enemy rocket make a direct hit on and destroy one of the team's bunkers, First Lieutenant Hagen moved toward the wrecked bunker and searched for team members, despite the fact that the enemy force now controlled the bunker area. With total disregard for his own personal safety, he crawled through the enemy fire while returning small arms fire upon the enemy force. Undaunted by the enemy rockets and grenades impacting all around him, First Lieutenant Hagen desperately advanced upon the destroyed bunker until he was fatally wounded by enemy small arms and automatic weapons fire. With complete disregard for his personal safety, First Lieutenant Hagen's courageous gallantry, extraordinary heroism, and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty, at the cost of his own life, were in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit upon him and the U.S. Army. Sergeant Anthony Anderson, Sergeant William Queen, and Sergeant William Raimondi. Of the 6 Green Berets who inserted onto that hilltop that night, these are the only 3 that came home. And as of 2009, Sergeant Queen, the last surviving member of RT Kansas, joined his brothers on their final patrol. 14 men, 6 Americans and 8 loyal Montagnard fighters, holding a lone hilltop against more than 2,000 NVA forces. A 30-minute Alamo outnumbered 107 to 1 by most estimates, falling back to a tight back-to-back defensive position, firing at point-blank range as waves of enemy soldiers continued over the crest of that hill. And just as it seems like it's the end for this recon team, the gunships arrive, forcing the NVA to scatter and flee from the air power they now had to face. Sounds like the plot to a Hollywood action movie, but RT Kansas lived that. And outside a small circle of Special Forces veterans, almost nobody has ever heard of it or any of the missions that MACV carried out, practically all of which could be made into a movie. Please like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you. Verbios, like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you.